tribe. I'm so excited that we are going to be catching up with Alice Morrison. Alice is a Scottish adventurer who is currently based in Morocco. Alice, hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. Hello, everyone.
It's a pleasure to get you back on. So, Alice, I'd love for you just to tell everybody just a little bit more about you and just sort of introduce yourself for those listening who haven't heard the first episode.
I'm here living in Morocco at the moment, and I actually make my living, small living, as an adventurer. I do adventures and I write about them, broadcast about them, and I have sponsors, which is all amazing. So I'm living a life that I could only have dreamed of, and it hasn't come all at once. I was actually living a very normal life, for want of a better word. I don't know if any life is normal, but you know what I mean. In England, I was the chief executive of a company, and then the company had to be taken over by another one. I was made redundant, and my feet went on my first very, very big adventure. I cycled from Cairo to Cape Town in the Tour d'Afrique and turned that negative, if you like, into a positive. And that was nearly a decade ago. It was 9 years ago, which I find unbelievable. And it set my feet on this path, which they've been following ever since. And I am in the incredibly lucky position of genuinely living something that I dreamed about.
Oh, I love that so much. And on the first episode, when we spoke to you in October 2019, you share more about your transition. You share more about your early life. So it's well worth taking a listen to that episode. But on this one, we're going to be catching up with you and learning more about one of your most recent expeditions called the Sahara Expedition. I'd love you to share just a little bit more about that expedition and how it came about.
The Sahara Expedition was a magnificent expedition. I'm going to say that it was my toughest one to date, which I didn't expect, but I'm sure we'll talk about that later. And basically, it was a 1,000-mile walk across the Sahara Desert in Morocco, beginning where I ended my last expedition, the Dra, at the Atlantic Ocean, and going all the way down to the Mauritanian border. And with me, I had 6 camels, who I gave very Scottish names to: Hamish, Hunter, Hector, Callum, Alistair, and a sausage. And my 3 Amazigh Berber guides, Brahim, Addi, and Lahu. So we were a real team. And this is the second part of a trilogy, because God willing, when the coronavirus is over, I'm going to do the third part, the third leg, which will be from the Mediterranean Ocean to where I began the whole thing in Ouarzazate. And with that, I will have walked the whole of Morocco.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the planning and the preparation for this trip. What did you need to do to get ready to head off? So I believe you headed off in November 2019. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So obviously planning is a really important stage. And this was the second leg, walking with the same men and some of the same camels. So if you like, some of the legwork had already been done, in that I knew who I was going with. I had complete confidence in them. And I used an expedition organizer here in Morocco. His name is Jean-Pierre Datchari from Montagne Maroc. And he's been working in the desert for 40 years. He speaks fluent Tashlahit, and he's just an all-round great guy. I wanted to work with someone on this because my aim is to explore, to actually really investigate what's around me. I'm very interested in climate change and its effect on the peoples and the environment of the desert. And to do that, I think it's fantastic to be able to link up with somebody who's got all the information, and Jean-Pierre has. So what we did together was we talked about what my goals were, what I wanted to achieve, places I wanted to see, and the kind of things I wanted to see. And then we went over the map together. And really, for the Sahara Expedition, one of the major things in the planning was where we could get reprovisioned, both with water and with food, because I cannot overemphasize how desolate, barren, empty the area I was walking through, the area we were walking through, the whole team was, and the lack of everything. So planning those points to get enough basic, food and water to survive was one of the crucial things of the expedition.
What were the goals from doing this expedition? What were you hoping to achieve? What were the sort of the mission objectives as such?
There's a lot of different mission objectives. The primary one was to do leg 2 of my complete Moroccan expedition. The real purpose for me is exploring, as I just said. And I think what I'm trying to do is reclaim the word exploring, because I think in the past it was used, for people from the West going to Africa or the Middle East or wherever and discovering, I'm putting inverted commas around that, new places, which of course were new to them and as the Sahara is new to me, but I'm not the first person ever to walk across the Sahara. So my aim is to look at what's around me in the world as it is now, and to look at the detail, not to go too fast, to take my time. The slower you travel, the more you learn. So my big goal is to really investigate the place I'm in. And by doing it on foot, and by doing it with 3 men who come from Morocco and who understand so much more than I do, and who come from a culture that I'm fascinated by and that I want to learn more from, I also have that advantage. So I'm learning all the time. And because I speak the languages of the region, that gives me unprecedented access to the people of the region, very sparsely populated, but there are nomads there. And I am lucky enough to be able to speak to them. And just one more point that I think is really interesting, perhaps to your listeners, because I'm a woman, I am allowed to speak to both women and men. And the very traditional cultures that I tend to explore into, women and men are reasonably segregated. So a male European would not be allowed to speak on his own to Sahrawi women. That wouldn't happen. My men were often having to wait outside the tent while I was inside having a nice cup of tea with the ladies.
The benefits of being a woman.
Well, here it's fantastic because, to be absolutely honest, I get to do both because I'm an odd woman by Moroccan standards, or by a lot of standards. I get to be with the men and be treated as a kind of honorary man. And I also get to be with the women. So I find it a massive advantage.
Working with like sort of an expedition organizer, I imagine that took a lot of the pressure off, having to figure out and do a lot of planning yourself. But what other things did you need to focus on in terms of preparing yourself? Because, it's 1,000 miles roughly across the Sahara on foot. Were you doing any training beforehand? Were you hoping to get your fitness while you were on the journey? Was there anything else that you needed to plan and prepare?
I didn't do any training. I thought, I'm fit enough. I live in the mountains. I go out for an occasional hike. So I sat on my bum and ate chocolate, gained weight, and then I got to the start line. And oh my goodness, it was a disaster. My first 2 weeks were a disaster. Honestly, I was carrying too much weight. I was out of condition, and we were walking really fast in the heat and the humidity because we started off at the sea for, like a half marathon a day, every single day without respite. So don't do as I do. That is my top tip to all of you. Train. And for this next one, although we've just been put on blooming lockdown, so I can't get out in the mountains, I'm actually being reasonably good about trying to keep my fitness up. And I hope that continues.
Well, let's talk about those first 2 weeks then. So take us back to the start. What was it like? 6 camels, 3 men, you starting this incredible journey. What's going on? Is it all a bit sort of crazy and chaos? Are the camels ready to start walking?
Right. So there's a lot of different things. So the lead up, the last 2 weeks, and I didn't fully answer your question because one of the things I have to do as preparation is I have to find sponsors and I have to get media attention, as I'm sure everyone realizes in this world. And I'm lucky enough, and I'm going to mention them because honestly, they are supporting me, so well. Crag Hoppers, who make hiking clothes, which I wore all the way through. They're really good. But just to say, any company that actually puts its money where its mouth is and supports someone like me, who's not like hugely famous, I just think they're doing great stuff. So Crag Hoppers and NTT Daytoday were my sponsor. I managed to get them on board just before I left. And I managed to, get all my press releases out and get some attention going. And then with all of that kind of activity of quite stressful because, these are things that are actually out of my control. I got to the start line and I was just so excited to be there because I was seeing my men again, who I'd missed dreadfully because I'd already spent 3 months the previous year with them. I was seeing my camels again, Hamish, my favorite, Hunter, a new one who'd been named after me because my middle name's Hunter. So I honestly turned up to the start line my kit was pretty good. I had everything sorted because I'd already done 3 months. I turned up full of like expectation of just having an amazing time. And actually, expectation is a very dangerous thing because I didn't. The reason was I was out of condition. I had not factored in that this expedition was going to be even tougher than the last one. We'd be walking faster, we'd be walking further, and we were walking straight into a landscape that is really very brutal. You know, there's not much there. And that can be extremely difficult on the head. And then the final kind of nail in the coffin of those 2 weeks was that actually the team wasn't working very well. And the reason was that one of the men didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be away from his family for 3 months. He didn't want to be in such a small group, just me and the 3 men. And he was very unhappy. And when one member of such a small team is unhappy, it poisons the whole atmosphere. So really, I'd say those first 2 weeks, I'd gone in with such high hopes, not even hopes. I was so sure it was going to be amazing. And it wasn't, but it was good because all of it, everything worked out. I got fitter. The weight came off really quickly. And I accustomed myself to the physical exercise. And the guy who didn't really want to be in the group, we organized for him to go home and for someone else to come and replace him. You know, because no blame, no foul. I mean, honestly, if you're not up for it, 3 months across one of the most hostile environments on earth it's not going to be good. So the first 2 weeks were a baptism of fire, but they taught me a whole load of valuable lessons. And then I relaxed into it and everything got better.
Tell us more about your day-to-day routines and what it was like out there. What was the structure of your day like?
One of the things I adore about these very long expeditions is that you get into a really amazing routine, because I find routine quite difficult, and at home I'm not a routine person. So morning routine, wake up to the sound of the men are Muslims, so they pray. So wake up at 6:30 to hear the prayers. Brahim would bring me some warm water, like half a small about 2 mugs of warm water in a very small bucket to wash in. Breakfast at 7, washing the dishes, packing up the camp, loading the camels, all of which we do together, taking everything down, and on the road by 8 or 8:30, usually 8:30. Then we would walk at a fast pace. We're walking at 5 kilometers an hour. It may not sound that fast, but you keep that up for 78 days. And believe you me, it takes its toll. Walk till 11:30. Have our 11s, which were a small packet of biscuits, like 6 biscuits and an orange. Give the orange peel to the camels because they love orange peel. And then we walk till we get to the bivouac. So our aim every day was 20 to 25 kilometers, 4 to 5 hours of walking. But we had to find a place to bivouac. And the camels were on heat. And I really must tell you about that in the next question. But basically, we had to find somewhere, if possible, with trees. And always you want somewhere with trees. And I know it sounds like, how could there possibly be trees in the desert? But there are some acacias. And if not, bushes. And when I say bushes, I mean small shrubs, so that the camels can graze and also be secured. Find the bivouac, unload the camels as quickly as possible to get the weight off their backs, because they are our priority. Unload them, hobble them so they can go off and graze. And then we put up the tents, make lunch in the mess tent, eat lunch. Then I wash the dishes, the men go and pray. And then I would write up my notes for the day. And then usually by about all my tasks would be done by, say, 5 o'clock. And that would be time for a bit of relaxation. Unfortunately, because of the wind, which again, I'm happy to talk about at length, you couldn't spend as much time outdoors because it was just hammering against us. So I'd be in my tent, have tea. The boys would bring some tea. We'd have tea and biscuits, chat. If the wind had dropped, by the time the wind dropped, we'd always go outside together, sit somewhere. And then it was time for dinner and then bed by 8:30.
And can I just get some clarifications? What is your tent? Is like a modern tent, or is it like an old school tent? Like what? Because I'm trying to imagine. I'm thinking about the Sahara Desert and what you're going into.
Excellent question. My tent is called Le Petit Fromage, the little cheese, because it's exactly like a triangle of cheese. That is its shape. It's handmade and homemade by Jean-Pierre, particularly for the expedition. It's held up by a huge coping stone in the middle, an actual stone. with a hole in it, which the main iron pole goes into. And then it has 4 poles around the edge and a huge number of guy ropes and big, thick cast iron tent pegs, because the conditions were so severe that you needed that kind of a tent to just keep up in the wind. I can't imagine, I could be wrong, but I can't imagine any non-specific normal tent surviving the conditions. But we also had a little maridadi, a little decoration. I had pockets inside made of lace. I had a lace curtain to keep the insects out if I could roll up my door. And I had a window which had a curtain inside and a flap outside. So I love my tent. I never sleep better than I sleep in that tent. And it's absolutely perfect for the job because it was designed specifically for that job.
And are you sleeping on like a modern like thermarest or something? Or
no, again, because we've got the camels, we can take like a thin mattress that rolls up. So like a sleeping mat, but it's actually sponge. Yeah, sponge. So a length of sponge, which again, I have to say is really pretty comfortable. And then for a pillow, I had a blow up pillow to always take with me, just a tiny one, and rolled up clothes.
I'd love you to just tell us a little bit more about what your duties were or what your role was in the camp. Obviously, I know like things like observation and seeing what's not going on around you, and you mentioned like washing up the dishes. Was there anything else that you were doing? Any other responsibilities that you needed to take on?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we're a team, and so to be treated as a team member rather than a client is really important to me, and I'm sure it would be to everybody in the tribe. So from the very beginning, I asked for duties, and everyone understood that my main job is the scribe. I'm like the scribe and the picture taker, and the men would ask me to take specific pictures for them. I would always send them pictures I'd taken of them, and also to their families sometimes, and videos, and that was important. So I was a kind of storyteller in that context, which is my job anyway. But with regards to everything else, so I would always help as an equal with the loading and unloading the camels, putting up and putting down the tents, and those were the main ones on the route, if you like. Then in addition, I would help with making the lunch. And I said I wanted to do all the washing up. So the washing up was my job, because what I didn't help with was making the bread or making the dinner, because that was my writing time. So I felt it was really my job to do the washing up. I was really happy to do it. And again, it was quite interesting because, sometimes we were under such severe water stress. So we would sometimes have the equivalent of 3 mugs of water to wash up soup and casserole dishes for 4 people, and that was it. And everything else, so knives, forks, anything we used, tea, glasses for tea, everything else. So washing up could sometimes be a real challenge, because you were like, you'd get very strategic, be like, right, that pot's really dirty, we're leaving it to last, we're going to do this first, we're going to use the soap, I'm only going to use a tiny bit of soap because I need to rinse them out, and you get very strategic about it. So those were my duties. And then just being and I had one other very important duty, which is interesting, because I'm a woman, as I spoke to you earlier about that. When we came, we had to get our water often from nomads because we didn't have water. And sometimes it was 200 kilometers between wells, which is 10 days. We couldn't carry that much water on the camels, and the camels also needed to drink. So whenever we saw a nomad's tent, we would head towards it because they would have a water store. And as we got closer, the men call me Zahra, which means flower, but it's a really nice Arabic name. And they'd go, Zahra, get to the front. You're the key. Because often when we get to a tent, it would be the women who were there and their husbands would be out with the camels. And in Moroccan culture, in this very traditional culture, no man could approach a woman in a tent. It would be considered very aggressive and would break all the cultural norms. And one time when my men were waiting outside, I brought them out some tea. I was sitting having a lovely tea and some delicious camel milk. I'd brought out tea for the guys, but they were sitting outside about 10 meters away from the tent. But the husband, and it was a wife and a sister in the tent, the husband had seen us from afar. And as I came out, suddenly I heard a yell from the boys going, Zahra, get out here. And I poked my head out, and there was this big man with a huge moustache and an even bigger stick running towards us because he'd seen 3 men outside his wife's tent. So I had to go out and say, no, it's all right. I'm here with them. Don't worry. So that was my other job. I was like the key to the nomads.
And you talked about the camels as well, and the camels being on heat, which sounds quite challenging. Tell us a little bit more about what it's like being on an expedition with 6 camels.
Well, this is one of my favorite subjects. So the 6 camels, all of them have got different personalities. They all are really well looked after, really well cared for. And the way we walked was 3 camels and 2 little teams. So, and the camels have a hierarchy. Now, they are all male camels because you can't mix your camels because there's too much hanky-panky. And between November and February, the exact time that we were walking, they're on heat, because it's male camels who go on heat. And when a male camel is on heat, he thinks of nothing but sex. When he smells a female camel, and they can smell them for up to 1 kilometer away, the following things happen. Very glamorous. Your male camel, Hamish, because Hamish was our lead camel, he blows a big pink bubble out the side of his mouth, like a football-sized bubble, that looks like it's made of pink bubble gum. This is filled with saliva and froth, which then goes all around his mouth. So when you're walking in the front with the camels, you get covered in camel spit. He starts to roar like a lion, like this incredible sound, so that we knew, which comes from the belly, so we knew there were female camels ahead, because there's wild camels and herds of camels in that region, long before we saw them. And then, if he can, what he'll do is stop, spread his back legs, pee, and flick the pee onto his back to make himself, it's like kind of Brute for camels, Old Spice for camels. Apparently the ladies love it. And the only problem with that, of course, is my sleeping mat is on the back of the camel, so that it stank of camel piss. I used like a rucksack cover to cover it. So that's what male camels do. And genuinely, it was quite a problem, them being on heat.
Did they, I was going to ask like a really personal question, like, did they get any action?
Well, oh my God. So I want you to picture the scene. It's early morning. We're all in the tent having breakfast. And Hector, who's the most innocent looking camel, he loved having his picture taken. He loves selfies, and his resting face is a kind of a pout. Think trout pout. That is Hector. Anyway, so he looks so innocent. Hector spots a lady camel and her probably year-old calf about 500 meters away from camp. And even though his front legs are hobbled, tied together, he creeps off. Brahim and me and Addy pop our heads out the tent, and there is Hector. And I swear to God, he is like the female camel is sinking to the ground, because the female camels couch, they kneel down if they're up for it. And Hector is within about 10 meters of nirvana. And then it's so tragic. All the other male camels spot what's going on, and they start galloping towards this hapless female. At which point, Adi Lahu and Brahim rush past me, all with big sticks, to just beat the camels off, because it would have been a mass rape of this poor female camel. So they're grabbing their halters and, giving the camels a whack and getting them away. So poor old Hector could not get his leg over, and it's literally the leg over. And I said to Brahim afterwards, I said, why didn't you let him just have a go? And he said, look, Sahara, because all the others had seen him and were galloping, if he'd had a moment to do his business, there would have just been mayhem and terrible fighting amongst all the camels in camp.
The last thing you wanted, but that was going to be my question. Oh God, bit of fun for little Hector.
I know, and but it was so funny because he's the most innocent looking. But male camels, on a slightly more serious note, during the mating season, they fight for supremacy. So when we started the trek, Hunter was the supreme camel. He was number 1. He was leading. But actually, after 2 weeks, Hamish, who's a bit younger, so his teeth aren't fully formed, but he's very strong. He challenged Hunter for supremacy. So he actually attacked him. And when a male camel attacks another male camel, they go either for the neck and for the legs. And their aim is to get the other camel down on the ground and then they put their chest on their head and smother them to death. It's very serious. And a grown male camel can take your arm off with his teeth. Anyway, Hamish beat Hunter, basically. Hunter was beaten. It was obvious. He ran away. The men managed to come in and break up the fight. And I've actually got that footage on my Instagram feed, Alice Out There #1. So if you scroll through, you'll see the moment when that happens. I was so lucky. I was filming and I actually got that moment. And after that, Hunter was the #1 camel. Hamish, I beg your pardon. Hamish was the #1 camel. So he took over from Hunter and he led the group.
One of the things that I personally loved is that you've recently started a new podcast called Alice in Wonderland, where you have the, I don't know if it was weekly, but you've got a number of episodes coming live from the Sahara Expedition, which I really enjoyed listening to. Tell us a little bit more about Alice in Wonderland, how it worked, I heard a couple of brilliant stories, which I'd love to share, but also people need to go listen to the podcast to hear them. Especially the one with like the sinking sand.
Oh my God.
But I'd love for you to tell everyone just a little bit more about your podcast and what they can expect to hear from it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for the little plug as well. And if you remember the first time we spoke, Sarah, you encouraged me to do a podcast, so I did.
Yay, I did.
And it was, yeah, you did. And before that, it was my friend Sam in Newcastle had said, you really must do one. But I'd kind of thought about it. And then you put the kind of, right, I really have to do this because I love yours so much. So, let's have a little bit of mutual congratulation, but a big thank you because I've enjoyed doing it so much. And yes, it's Alice in Wonderland, Wander with an A. See what I did there. And it is just my adventures. And it was fantastic. So from episodes 4 to 10 are live from the Sahara, and it's bi-weekly. I'm currently doing it weekly through this Corona thing just to give people a bit of extra things to listen to. But it was bi-weekly, and it was a real challenge because we didn't always have signal by any means. But for some reason, we were so lucky. About every fortnight, we'd come into a place where I'd have signal, and then I'd have to rush up to the top of something and cower behind a stone because the winds are so strong. I'm sorry, guys, all you'll hear is like woof, woof, woof. And talk to my producer, Vic, who lives in Norway. And off we went, and I just would tell the tales of my adventures. And because you're doing it live and it's at that moment, you get a certain feel to it, I think, because things have just happened and you're right in the heart of it. And actually, although it's always horrible to listen to your own voice, it's been really good for me as well as a kind of audio diary of that time.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly powerful, actually, and I think sometimes it's amazing how many things you end up forgetting about. So you were on your expedition over Christmas and New Year. What was it like? New Year's Eve, New Year's Day? Did you end up doing anything special? Had you set yourself any New Year's goals?
New Year, no, we had a lovely New Year's Eve. We set up a campfire and we had our dinner. We brought the rugs and the food outside and we just set up our little inside the Giton. The wind had dropped that day, so we set up a really beautiful campfire and the four of us sat together and wished each other Asagwas Amaino, which is Happy New Year in Tashlahit, Eid Said in Arabic, and Happy New Year in English, and went to bed as normal. But we'd had a really lovely evening in front of the campfire, and no resolutions, because to be frank, I'm so lucky in that I was doing my resolution at that time, and my resolution really was to succeed in this expedition because of the difficulties that were involved in it. But Christmas was interesting because I had the most horrible cold and there was no let up. The thing about an expedition is if you feel a bit under the weather, tough titty, you just got to keep going. So I had this horrible head cold. It just was infecting everything I did. I couldn't breathe very well. And I felt so sorry for myself. We bivouacked on Christmas Eve and I felt really, really sorry for myself. I'll be truthful. And I wasn't in love with everybody and I wasn't feeling it like I normally did. But I had brought loads of stuff from the UK. So I brought a big box of Quality Street. My mum had wrapped up presents for the men of Edinburgh Rock and I'd brought them gifts in the market that I knew they'd like, headscarves and socks and things like that. So on Christmas Eve, I thought, stop feeling sorry for yourself, for goodness sake. And I did. I pulled my socks up, literally. And I said on Christmas Eve day, we're walking, and I said, right, boys, tonight It's Christmas Eve. And in Islam, they believe in jinn. So you have 3 or 4 kinds of beings. You have God, you have angels, you have jinn, and then you have humans. And humans and jinn live in 2 parallel but joined universes. And jinn, we can't see them, but they can come in and out of our universe. This is what Islam teaches. So I said to my men, I said, right, there is a jinn called Father Christmas. And if you've been good men, he will bring you gifts tonight on this special night in the Christian calendar, because Muslims as well believe in Jesus, in the birth of Isa. They call him Isa, but he's a prophet. He's a very, very important prophet in Islam. I said, this is the celebration of Isa's birth. And if you're good, he will bring gifts. So what I need from you tonight, boys, is 1 clean sock each. Now, that threw everybody into a panic. And there were like some really serious questions like, Zahra, when you say clean, is 2 days old clean enough? Because of course we don't have any water. So I was like, yes, 2 days old is acceptable, but no more than 2 days old. So that afternoon after we bivouacked, there was quite a little frenzy of activity, and people were rationing out like a mug of water each to wash their socks in. So in the evening after dinner, I brought 3 clothes pegs from home. We put the socks up, and I said to the men, I said, right, they all sleep in the tent together. I said, now, if you hear anything tonight, it's the jinn coming. And I don't want any of you to come out. You have to stay in the tent, but don't worry, it's the jinn coming to fill your stockings. So they're all laughing. They all think it's hilarious. They all go to bed. And we all go to bed. Of course, in the middle of the night, I come out with my quality street and 100 dirham note, which is like 10 quid, stick them in the stockings and creep back to my tent. And I'm so happy by this stage because it's so much fun. Anyway, the next morning, everybody wakes up and I hear them praying. And then the minute they finish praying, I come out the tent and they're all standing in front of the socks, which have been clipped onto the clothesline. And they're all like, Zahra, the jinn came. We heard the jinn during the night, but he came. And I said, yes, go inside and we can open our socks. Because I brought one for me as well, just so that they, just for the fun of it. And we all went inside and opened the socks, and there were the quality street and the money, and they were so happy, and I was so happy, and it was such a lovely moment that we shared.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. I feel awful asking. Did they know it was you?
Oh, of course they did. They were saying things like, Zahra, the jinn walked very heavily, a bit like how you walk, Zahra.
Oh, it's so cute. That is so cute. I love things like that on like expeditions. Like, how fantastic. One of the things I'd love to know as well is being in the desert, and one of the things you actually mentioned earlier was, initially when you started the walk out at the beginning of the 2 weeks, you're sort of walking into this incredibly tough terrain. It's getting, it's very, very desolate. How did you cope walking into the nothingness?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I imagine it must be a bit like some of the Arctic explorers, very strong winds blowing against you all the time, sand being blasted into your face, constant wind all the time. Even when you bivouac, you're crouching in the tents because that is just beating against you. And then this totally flat landscape. So for weeks, we were walking on total flatness, with just this blue curve of sky above us. And I felt like I was walking on top of the globe. I really felt like I was on top of the planet, just going on and on and on and on. Of course, it has immense beauty, and not all the trip was like that, but we're talking about that right now. Some of the trip was through kind of quite verdant areas. We had the dunes, we had the sea, so there was a lot of variety. But this central part, when it was just dead flat and either stones or soft sand, and soft sand just kills you. Oh my gosh, it just kills you. Your hamstrings, your Achilles, it is murder. In fact, one day we were walking along the soft sand and Brahim said to me, Zahra, my legs have a headache. And I knew exactly what he meant. Anyway, you've got this weird psychological thing of, there is nothing to tether your head onto. So you are just, I felt like, I'm with, the ships of the desert, but it did feel like that. All I had to tether me was my own, if you like, my own strength of character, but also the men. And that's where, walking with the men is so important. And those 3 men are so dear to me and so much fun and so interesting. And I could ask them about their lives, about Moroccan culture, about what it's like to grow up as a nomad. Adi's a nomad. He grew up his whole life in a tent, guarding the sheep. So I had the opportunity to improve my languages. You know, these things are privileges. They're absolute privileges. And that's how I saw them. There were dark moments, but you just don't dwell on them. You just keep your eye to the light.
One of the things you mentioned as well is about looking at, climate change, and I hope you're going to say this right. The desertification. Is that like the spread of the desert and its impact on the landscape and the people? What did you learn about being in the desert?
Okay, again, excellent questions. So desertification is the eating up of arable land by the desert, so it's no longer able to sustain crops. And that is calculated, in the most recent survey, as increasing at 16% a year. Now, that is an extraordinary amount, and I would treat that with a little bit of caution. However, there's no question that it's increasing. Climate change, in what we've seen in Britain this year, is incredible floods, and my heart goes out to anyone who's been affected by those, because, oh my goodness, how difficult is that? Where I live and where I explore, it's the opposite. It's the drying out. There is less and less rain. The region I was walking across last had good rain in 2014. That is 6 years ago. So what I was interested to see is, how are people dealing with this? How is the environment dealing with it? What does it look like? The Sahara Desert has grown. Now, Sahara is the biggest hot desert in the world. It goes across 11 countries, and it has grown by 10% in 100 years, which is an enormous, enormous, enormous amount. But what I saw with my own, because obviously I can't see that, I'm going across one small part of it, but what I saw with my own eyes was a place where the vegetation, such as it is, and this place does support life. It's one of the least densely populated areas on the planet, but the Sahrawis, the desert nomads, do live there with their camels, and it does sustain life. We saw wildlife, which I can come to afterwards, but if you look at the basic camel herds, one family might have 200 camels in a herd. And what they're having to do is move to different areas to take advantage of the small amounts of grazing there is on these very small prickly desert plants. And then the other big thing for them is water. And I mentioned earlier that we were always in water stress. But of course, if you're a nomad, you're under much greater water stress because you live there all the time. Although now what's happened is a lot of nomads also have a home in one of the cities, and they commute in and out, or they live in their tent for 3 months and then they live in the city for the rest, or they hire a herdsman from Mauritania and they take their family to the city, because of course as well, education is mandatory. Primary school education is mandatory for all children in Morocco. So the nomad children have to go to school now. For water, what they did is, it's so clever. They have these enormous plastic bags that can carry 60 cubed metric tons, which is basically like a normal sitting room full of water. It's a huge amount. And they truck the water in. They fill up these reservoirs, these plastic reservoirs, and then they live on that. And the camels live in it until they can truck the next water in. So what I discovered, one of the interesting things, was how clever people are adapting. And that even though, the water is shrinking, they're finding ways to live their traditional lifestyle and just to adapt it. And I love that. I find that really exciting.
You finished the Sahara Expedition in late February 2020. Reflecting back now, what do you think were some of the key lessons that you learned and that you've taken away from that experience?
I think being an adventurer, the best things you can have are a very short memory and like an enormous vat of optimism. And I have both those things, but I really seriously, I've got to keep in training for the next one, because I always do this. I mean, I'm never well trained enough, but I just didn't think it was going to be as tough as it was. And it really was tough. The whole expedition was tough. That was number one. So, don't come in with assumptions. It's all going to be la ha ha he he. The second one is, I learned so much patience on this expedition. Patience just to get through the days, patience to really be where you are and to appreciate what you've got. There were some days there was no living things. One day all I saw was one spider. But I appreciated that spider. My goodness, I appreciated the heck out of that spider. So really, seriously, appreciate your moments and don't worry about the future. Future's going to come. Just do the now. Be patient. When you're feeling out of sorts, which, I was sometimes, you're going to get through it. You'll feel out of sorts for an hour. It'll be gone in an hour or a day or a week, but it will go. Love the people you're with. Give them your heart, give them your friendship, and they will give you theirs back. And honestly, for me, the overwhelming lesson is just how beautiful our world is. I've talked an awful lot about the kind of hardship and difficulty, but oh my goodness, the Sahara, the sunsets and the sunrises over the dunes. My heart was like just about doing a jig in my chest. You could barely breathe sometimes because of the magnificence of this landscape. The joy when something happened, a desert fox, one of the little fennecs with the little like rabbits with the enormous pointy fox ears sprung up one day under the feet of the camels. And it'd been a really hard day. It was 5 hours in. We'd done 25K. We weren't there yet. And then this little fox comes beeping out and runs away from us. And it's just like this kind of huge explosion of wonder and appreciation for how incredible nature is. So, just feel the joy, guys. Feel the joy. That's the biggest lesson.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that this is part 2. I'd love you to share a little bit more about part 3 and when you're planning to take that on.
Part 3, inshallah. I mean, coronavirus has influenced all that we do. I'm in lockdown at the moment. I can't leave the house at all, except for shopping, not even for exercise. So, that has its challenges. But God willing, I will do the last part of my expedition starting at the end of June. Last part of the expedition, it will take 50 days and it goes across the Atlas Mountains. So we'll be taking the camels through the mountains, which is very challenging. Same men, same camels. So as soon as we're allowed to and it's safe after June, I will do the expedition. Because apart from anything else, I want to put some economy back into the pockets of the people who live their lives by supporting expeditions like this. So, they need the money. I want to do the expedition. I want to support the economy as much as I can. And I want to finish off my mission to walk the whole of Morocco, to explore the whole of Morocco on foot.
What have you got planned for the next couple of months before, fingers crossed, that part 3 takes place? How will you be filling your time?
My real aim in these next 2 months is to put into practice those lessons that I learned in the Sahara, which were mainly about patience and about enjoying the moment. I'm trying also to really work on my own self-discipline. So I'm trying to work out at least once, probably twice a day. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. There's no real excuse. I can't do endurance stuff because I'm in a flat, but I can keep my body in decent shape. I'm trying to eat as healthily as I can. Again, that is slightly down to what supplies I can get. At the moment, I've still got some fresh veg left from my last shop, but when I next go to the shops, I don't know if there'll be any fresh veg. You just work with what you've got. And I'm trying to keep really busy. I'm doing a lot of writing, podcasting, telling the stories of the Sahara, the Dra, and trying to communicate to everyone about, the wonderful adventures that I've been lucky enough to do and that I want to share with people, not to make them feel like, oh my God, she's so annoying, look at her and her adventures, but more just to tell the stories of the things I've seen to bring those alive for people.
And Alice, where can people find more information out about you and find out more about these incredible stories that you've got?
Everything is dead easy for me. I'm just alicemorrison.co.uk. The blog's on there. The social media links are on there. The podcast is on there. The About Me, every single piece of information is on there. How to get my books. So just go on over there, right-hand click on the navigation, top right. Everything is there and you can just have a little explore around.
Fantastic. I'll make sure I put all of the links to your website, to your blog, to your podcast, to all of your different books in the show notes. But Alice, before you go, I'd love for you just to leave final words of advice and wisdom for other women out there who may be going through crossing their own Sahara Desert, doing their own personal challenge, whatever that may be. What advice would you have for them?
What I've learned from myself, and I do think this really helps, is it's the same old messages. You are really strong. When you're tested, that is the time to shine. So we are being tested now, and we're not being tested in an exciting way. We're not being tested about doing a grand adventure. We're being tested to survive something that is affecting the whole world. If you can survive this with grace and with happiness and with fortitude, because there are going to be some bad times, you will be being true to yourself. So please dig into your inner strength. You can do this, and God willing, you and your family will be safe. But just, this is a part of your life, so you have to live it. So take as much from it as you can. Good luck, stay safe, stay well.
Thank you, Alice. Hey Tribe, I hope you enjoyed that Tough Girl Extra podcast episode with Alice. What an absolute inspiration. And everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes, so please do go and visit toughgirlchallenges.com. Toughgirlchallenges.com is basically the main central hub. So if you go and visit the website, you'll be able to find more information out about me, the different challenges that I've done, more information about the podcast, the Tough Girl blog. There's also different books that I've written on the Marathon Desarts, climbing Kilimanjaro, and chalet hosting. There's also links to all of my social media, from the YouTube channel to Instagram to Twitter, Facebook, etc. And you can also click on that amazing button to become a patron. So the Tough Girl podcast is supported by about 267 individuals, men and women around the world, who believe in my message of motivation and inspiration and want to help me increase the amount of female role models in the media. What I'm trying to do is to encourage other women and girls to get out there, to get fit and active, to travel and to explore, but also for young girls when they're growing up, when they're considering doing more adventurous things, they'll have this resource, this massive collection of stories from women of different ages and different backgrounds, whether it is doing a polar adventure, whether it is crossing the Sahara Desert, whether it's doing a big run, whether it's cycling, running, rowing, through hiking, whatever the challenge may be, that there'll be stories that they can listen to and actually hear other adventurers sharing them. Just want to share a couple of future episodes that we have coming out in the coming weeks. We're going to be speaking with Miriam Lancewood on the 14th of April. Miriam wrote an incredible book called Women in the Wilderness, a story of survival, love and self-discovery in New Zealand. On the 21st of April, we're speaking with Dr. Kate Edwards and Dr. Blair Green, who wrote the book Go Ahead, Stop and Pee, Running During Pregnancy and Postpartum, a really, really fascinating episode. On the 28th of April, we're speaking with Gina Johansson, who's walked 3,000 kilometers the length of Norway, plus did a solo crossing of Lake Baikal in Siberia. And then on the 5th of May, we have Rosie Watson, who's going to be sharing more about her run from the UK to Mongolia. So there's lots of incredible episodes coming out. I'm trying really, really hard over the coming weeks to actually make sure that there's 2 episodes coming out per week. So Tough Girl Extra episodes will be coming out on a Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. So make sure that you do hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out. We've caught up with Anna McNuff, who shared more about running 2,300 miles through Great Britain barefoot. We've spoken with Wendy Searle. He's an adventurer, mother of 4, and the 7th woman to ski solo and unsupported from Hercules Inlet to the South Pole. Sarah Davis comes back on and shares more about paddling the length of Australia's longest river, the Murray River, which was 2,500 kilometres. And Dr. Kate Leeming comes back on to share more about cycling the entire Nambian coastline, a 1,621 kilometre sand cycling expedition. Thank you again for all of your incredible support, and I can't wait to be with you next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl podcast. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.